I arrived early, not because I wanted to, more like muscle memory. When you grow up trying to be easy to manage, punctuality becomes second nature. I'd booked the restaurant myself, reserved the table, confirmed the dietary requests, even picked the wine ahead of time so no one would have to think too hard. One last favor before I left the role I never applied for. It was one of those places with exposed brick and dim lighting where the servers all wore black and didn't write anything down. Intimate, expensive without screaming it. I knew they'd approve. My mom would say something like, "Oh, this is lovely," and my dad would glance at the wine list with mild approval. We all had our parts to play. I was graduating that week, not just from uni, but from everything else too. From keeping the peace. From nodding at things I didn't believe in. From lowering my volume, rounding off the sharp edges, explaining myself. I was exhausted from it, like my soul had been holding its breath for years. And this dinner, it was the final act. I just hadn't told them yet. The waiter led me to the table. Corner seat, nice view. I took the chair with my back to the wall, always safest to see what's coming. I placed the 2 small gift boxes in front of their seats. Pale gray, simple ribbon, nothing too flashy. You'd think they were cufflinks or jewelry. I kept adjusting them, making sure the ribbons looked the same. They'd sit there through the starters, maybe through mains too. I hadn't decided yet. Timing matters. I heard their voices before I saw them. My mom, a little too loud. My dad, quieter, steady like a metronome. Same rhythm for 30 years. When they spotted me, she smiled like this was her event. He nodded like it was a job well done. "Darling, this place is gorgeous," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "You always had such good taste." I wanted to say, "I got it from therapy, not you," but I just smiled and sat down. They didn't comment on the boxes. My mom glanced, curious, but said nothing. My dad sat without a word, napkin on his lap, already scanning the menu. I could feel my pulse in my neck. Small talk began. How was the ceremony? Did I get photos? Had I thought more about post-grad plans? I gave polite answers. I was saving the real story, the one about the damage and the invoices, the cost of being their daughter. I didn't want to ruin dinner. I just wanted to end the performance. The waiter came back to take our order. I didn't hear what they chose. My voice sounded thin when I answered. I felt like a mirror that had finally decided not to reflect, because tonight, I wasn't there to make things smooth. I was there to make things clear. I always hated celebration. Dinners. Not because of the food or the fuss, but because they never really felt like they were about me. My milestones were just excuses for my parents to rehearse their own success stories. How hard they'd worked to raise me. How much they'd sacrificed. How they'd always known I'd do well if I just applied myself. They loved a good public narrative. The proud parents of the accomplished daughter. It looked great on social media. Better than the reality that they hadn't really known me at all. They'd shaped me like a project, then acted confused when the final product didn't resemble them. Mom launched into a monologue before the starters even arrived. "I still remember your first day of school," she said, reaching for the bread like it was all very nostalgic. "You clung to my hand like you'd never let go. You mean the day I sobbed because I didn't want to go back to being away from home 6 hours a day because it was the only place I could breathe? That day?" Dad chuckled. "She was always a sensitive one. Big feelings. Remember when you wrote that letter saying you were going to run away and live in a tree because we were too loud?" "You were 7, Mom added. Such a dramatic age." I smiled again, the well-trained reflex. But inside, I was busy remembering how I'd hidden in the bathroom that same night, how I'd shoved a towel against the crack under the door to muffle the sound of their fighting. I hadn't wanted to run away for fun. I'd wanted silence, safety, solitude, things no one in that house had been able to give me. The starters arrived. Mom complimented the plating. Dad made a joke about tiny portions for big prices. The rhythm of the evening settled in. To anyone watching, we looked like a normal family. The kind you see in insurance ads or brochures for private schools. Laughing lightly, wine glasses clinking, matching coats on the back of chairs. I watched them talk, about retirement plans, about how the garden was coming along, about a cousin's baby. They didn't ask me many questions. They never did, really. Just assumed I was fine unless I came apart in front of them. And even then, it was framed as an inconvenience. A bump in the road. Something to move past. They didn't. No, I'd spent 2 years trying not to disappear. That I'd sat in rooms with therapists saying things like, "That must have been very lonely for you," and "Your feelings are valid." Words that had never once been said at home. Words I'd had to pay to hear. Mum sipped her wine. "We're so proud of you, you know? All this, despite being such a handful." My fingers brushed the ribbon on one of the boxes. A handful. That word again. Like I was a bag of noise and inconvenience they'd had to carry. Never mind that I'd spent most of my childhood tiptoeing around their moods, learning to disappear when things got tense. "I actually have something for you both," I said, before I could change my mind. Their eyes lit up. Gifts meant gratitude. Gratitude meant they'd done a good job. I pushed the boxes gently across the table. Just a little something to say thank you. It wasn't a lie. It was just not the thank you they were expecting. Mum went for the ribbon first. Like, it was a Christmas present she was politely pretending not to expect. Dad just tore into his. No ceremony. He hated suspense. They each opened the lid, lifted the tissue paper, and then they froze. It took a second. 2. Maybe 3. "What is this?" Dad asked, holding up one of the papers like it might be a joke he hadn't figured out yet. Mum blinked. Her fingers fumbled with the envelope inside. She pulled out another page, scanned it, and looked up slowly. "They're invoices," I said, as casually as I could manage. "From my therapy sessions. Every one of them." The silence stretched across the table like fog. Dad glanced at Mum. Mum glanced back at Dad. Neither of them laughed. I hadn't really expected them to. Not the real kind of laugh anyway. Just maybe one of those tight little chuckles people do when they're not sure how offended they're allowed to be yet. "I don't understand," Mum said finally, her voice light but tight. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No," I said calmly. "You always said I was expensive. So, here's the receipt." It hung there. The sentence. Just loud enough to drown out the restaurant noise around us. I saw the couple at the next table glance over, probably picking up on the shift in air pressure. Something about the energy of a family coming undone in real time. People notice, even if they pretend not to. Dad leaned back in his chair, his jaw clenched. "So what? You're trying to blame us for your therapy?" "I'm not blaming you," I said, though I was. "I'm just showing you the cost of surviving it." Mum blinked fast. I could almost see her recalculating. She looked down at the papers again. The neat formatting, the dates, the balance due. Maybe she noticed how frequent the sessions had been. Maybe she didn't realize how long I'd been going. Or how early I'd started. "You went for this long?" she said quietly. "Yeah," I replied. Turns out, recovering from a childhood where love felt like a contract takes a while. There it was. The first real crack. Dad scoffed. "This is ridiculous." "Is it?" I asked. Because when I first started going, I couldn't make eye contact with anyone. I'd apologized just for being in the same room. I thought that if people liked me, it was a debt I had to repay. I wonder where I got that idea. Mum opened her mouth, closed it again. I wasn't trying to humiliate them. At least, not entirely. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. Something to show for the years spent undoing what they never admitted doing in the first place. "The thing is," I said, "I didn't do this to make you feel bad. I did it because I needed you to see. You've always been so good at looking away." Mum's face crumpled slightly. Dad just stared, like I'd spoken in a foreign language he refused to translate. "I know this isn't how you imagined this. Dinner going," I added. "But this is my graduation too. Not just from uni, from silence, from pretending we were fine, from earning your love like it was something I had to audition for." I paused, letting the words breathe. Then, "You don't have to pay the invoices, by the way. They're already covered. Just thought you should know the price." Mom reached for her wine glass, hands shaking just enough to make the stem rattle against the table. She took a sip, as though hoping it would erase everything she'd just read, everything I'd just said. But nothing budged. Dad still hadn't said another word. He kept flipping through the papers like he was trying to find a punchline, something that would tell him this was all one elaborate performance, a stunt, not a statement. But the punchline was the truth, and that always lands with a thud. "Why now?" Mom asked finally, soft and brittle. "Because I'm done," I said. "Not done talking to you or done loving you. I don't think it's ever that clean. But I'm done trying to be the version of me that fits inside your expectations. The quiet, grateful, easy daughter. She's tired." The waiter came over just then, offering us a dessert menu we didn't ask for. The tension must have hit him like a wall, but he stayed professional, eyes politely blank, voice neutral. We waved him away, and I couldn't help but laugh a little. That awkward laugh that escapes when everything's just too heavy and you know you've passed the point of no return. "I thought we did our best," Dad muttered, still not looking at me. "Maybe you did," I said, evenly. "But your best still broke things. It made love feel conditional. It made emotions feel like inconveniences. I learned to read the room before I learned to read books." Mom winced at that. "Do you remember when I got that award in year 10? I asked. "The writing one? You said, 'That's nice, but don't let it get to your head.' And then you told me not to post about it online because it might make my cousin feel bad." They both looked blank, like the memory didn't register, but it stayed lodged in me, the way moments of pride were immediately doused in guilt. It was like being handed a sparkler and then told not to light it. "I'm not doing that anymore," I said, shrinking myself to keep you comfortable. Silence again, long and heavy, the kind that doesn't just sit on the table. It spills onto the floor, crawls up the walls. "You make it sound like we were monsters," Dad said. I shook my head. "You weren't. You were human, but so was I. And I needed more than what you were willing to see." Mom reached out, almost reflexively, like she might grab my hand, but she stopped midway. Maybe she knew I wouldn't take it. Maybe she realized this wasn't a moment for smoothing things over. "You're angry," she said. "No," I replied. "I was angry. Now I'm just clear. This dinner isn't revenge. It's release." They both stared at me like I was someone they didn't recognize. And in a way, I was. This version of me didn't flinch, didn't fold, didn't apologize for being inconvenient. I wasn't the peacekeeper tonight. I was the truth teller. "I don't expect you to understand it all right now," I said, softer. "But I do expect you to sit with it. Like I had to. For years." Dad closed the box, set it aside like it might bite. Mom just kept looking at me, eyes shiny but unreadable. We sat there, three people in the ruins of politeness, trying to figure out what to build next, if anything. The waiter came back with the bill. I paid it without a word. The ride home was oddly quiet. Mom and Dad sat in the front, and I was in the back, pressed up against the window. It felt like one of those moments where you should be crying, but all the tears have already been used up in the years leading up to it. I wasn't sad. I wasn't relieved. I was just empty in a way. It was like the part of me that had been holding my breath for all this time finally let go. No more pretending, no more performing. Mom's voice broke the silence, but I could tell she wasn't really talking to me, more like she was talking to herself, trying to make sense of everything I'd thrown at her. "I just don't understand why you didn't come to us sooner," she said, her voice small, tired. "Because you wouldn't have heard me," I answered, blunt. "You've never heard me. You listen, sure, but you hear what you want to hear, and I wasn't what you wanted to hear." "Nat, don't," I said, cutting her off. "You don't get to apologize now. You've had years to listen, years to change, and I needed you to change, Mom. I was just a kid." There was a pause, a long, long pause. The streetlights flickered past, casting long shadows across the road, and the sound of the engine hummed in the background like the only thing that hadn't changed. "Can we talk about this tomorrow?" Dad asked, his voice low. "We're all too upset right now." I didn't say anything. I didn't want to say anything. Talking about it now wouldn't help. It would just drag us back into the same circles we'd been stuck in for so long. No, this was done. The conversation could happen, but it wouldn't fix things. Not now. Not this far in. We got home, and Mum and Dad went straight to their room, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The door to their bedroom clicked shut with a soft thud. I could have gone after them. I could have knocked and said the words that might have made them feel better. But I didn't. I just stood there for a moment, looking at the door that separated us. And then I went to my own room, closed the door behind me, and sat down on the edge of the bed. I opened my phone, scrolling through my messages. Some friends had texted about the dinner, but I couldn't answer them. Not now. Not until I figured out what the hell just happened. And then there it was. That one message that stopped me cold. It was from my old therapist, the one I'd seen just before I moved away. She'd been the only one who truly saw me. Not as a daughter or a project, but as me. Just me. "Hey, Natalie," the text read. "I know things are hard right now, but I want you to remember what we worked on. You have the right to be angry, and you've taken a huge step today. I'm proud of you." I sat there staring at the screen. The words didn't make the pain go away. They didn't make everything all right. But they reminded me of something I hadn't really let myself think about in a while. That I was worthy of care. That I was allowed to take up space, even when the world tried to make me shrink. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of, maybe not peace, but something close to it. I wasn't at war with myself anymore. I wasn't trying to be who they needed me to be. I was just me. The next morning, everything felt heavy. The silence in the house seemed to grow louder with every passing minute. I knew it wasn't just me who was affected by last night. It was like an invisible wall had been built between us. Mum and Dad, usually so quick to fill the space with noise, seemed to be holding their breath, unsure of what came next. I made myself a cup of tea, just like I always did, but even that felt different. The routine I'd clung to for so many years felt hollow now, as though the world I'd built around myself was slowly starting to collapse. The soothing steam from my mug did little to comfort me today. Everything I touched seemed to remind me of how much had been left unsaid. Mum eventually came into the kitchen. She didn't say anything at first, just stood by the counter, looking at the kettle like she was waiting for it to do something. Anything, really. I could feel the weight of her thoughts, but she didn't know how to voice them. I didn't know how to voice mine either. She finally spoke, breaking the quiet with a tentative question. "Natalie, are you really sure about everything you said last night?" Her voice was soft, careful. "Yeah," I answered without hesitation. "I've never been more sure of anything." She exhaled, shoulders slumping slightly. I don't know how to fix this. Nat, I don't know if I can." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Maybe you don't have to fix it. Maybe it's just broken. And that's okay." Mum's face shifted, confusion flickering across her features. "But you don't just break things. You fix them. You fix family." "Not always," I said quietly. "Sometimes breaking is the only way to move on." Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought she might say something else. Apologize again, maybe, or even try to make it better. But she didn't. Instead, she simply nodded, defeated. The words she'd been holding in so tightly, words I'd waited years to hear, were still locked behind her lips. And maybe, I realized, they never would come. I could feel the sting of the years stretching out in front of me, of all the missed opportunities, the silence that had festered between us. I thought of the therapy sessions, of how much I'd paid to learn how to live with the pain they'd caused. I thought of the invoice I'd given them last night, and I wondered if they even realized what it meant. In a way, I didn't need them to understand anymore. I didn't need them to validate my feelings or apologize for everything they hadn't done. I was done waiting for them to fix things. I finished my tea, setting the mug down with a soft clink. "I've got to go out for a while," I said, my voice low but firm. "I'll be back later." Mum didn't stop me. She just nodded again, the kind of nod that said she knew I needed space, that I needed time away from everything. I left the kitchen, feeling lighter with every step. Outside, the cool air hit me, and for the first time in a while, I didn't feel so suffocated. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe things weren't fixed. But I was free. I was free from the weight of their expectations, from the need for them, to apologize, from the guilt I had carried for far too long. I didn't have all the answers, but for once, I didn't need them. I spent the afternoon walking around the city, letting my thoughts drift like the wind. It felt like I was distancing myself from everything that had been so tightly wound around me for years. The streets, usually full of noise and urgency, seemed quieter today. Like they too were aware of the silence that had settled in my life. It was as though the city itself was giving me space, letting me breathe. I ended up at a small park by the river, sitting on one of the benches that faced the water. The gentle flow of the river mirrored my thoughts, constantly moving, constantly shifting. I watched as the water swirled and carried things with it. Leaves, twigs, whatever it could grab. Nothing stayed still for long. As I sat there, I realized something that I had been avoiding, even in the clarity of my decision. The truth of what I was doing, the truth about my parents, and about me, was far more complicated than I had allowed myself to admit. I wasn't just angry. It wasn't just about the neglect, or the manipulation, or the years of feeling like I didn't matter. It wasn't just about the gifts I'd given them last night, though I knew that would be the trigger. It was about the simple fact that, for most of my life, I had been invisible to them. I had spent so many years trying to fill the spaces they left empty, trying to prove I was worthy of love, of attention, of respect. And all along, I had been the one who ended up sacrificing myself. Every time they made a decision for me, every time they ignored my needs, every time they dismissed my feelings, I had been there, silent, waiting for them to notice. But they never did, not in the way I needed them to. The truth was that they hadn't just failed me, they had failed themselves too. They hadn't given me the tools to be strong, to be independent, to be anything but a reflection of their own brokenness. Theirs was a legacy of silence, of putting on a front, of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I thought about how much of my life had been spent on the sidelines of their story, how I had never been invited to be a full participant, in their world, only a spectator, or worse, an accessory to their narrative. I had always been the one left to pick up the pieces, left to heal alone. The realization stung. I hadn't just been angry with them for what they had done. I had been angry because I had allowed myself to be invisible for so long. I had kept the hurt to myself, allowed it to fester, and never fully acknowledged the damage it had done. And now, I was faced with a choice. I could continue to hide behind the barriers of my own pain, letting the resentment simmer. Or I could face the truth, accept that this was how things were, and that it was okay to let go. I wasn't ready to forgive them yet. I wasn't sure if I ever would be. But what I did know was that I had to stop waiting for them to make it right. That was the only way I would ever get out of the cycle. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. There was a weight, lifting, even if just a little. The river flowed steadily, and with it, so did my thoughts. I wasn't sure where the current would take me next. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a choice in the matter. It wasn't up to them anymore. The next day was the graduation dinner. The room was filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. I'd been dreading it for weeks, knowing that I would have to sit across from my parents, pretending like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. It hadn't been fine for years. I felt a knot in my stomach as I walked into the restaurant. The familiar faces of family friends were scattered across the room, some with exaggerated smiles, others with polite nods. I could hear the murmurs of congratulation floating around me, and yet, in the middle of all of it, I felt more isolated than ever. My parents were already seated at a table near the front, their faces bright with forced excitement. I could see my mother's proud smile, but there was no warmth behind it. My father's gaze was distant, as usual, a glass of wine in hand. They looked so much like the people I had once longed to see as my support system, but now they were just strangers to me. As I walked toward them, I hesitated, my hands gripping the small gift boxes I'd prepared. I had wrapped them neatly, with care, though I knew it wouldn't matter to them. But it mattered to me. This was my way of reclaiming my voice, of standing up for myself when they had never stood up for me. I set the boxes down in front of them and took my seat across from them, the tension thick in the air. Neither of them spoke immediately. My mother picked up the box in front of her, her eyes narrowing slightly as she noticed the weight of it. "What's this?" she asked, her voice polite but with an edge of curiosity. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "A gift," I said simply. She raised an eyebrow. "A gift for us? We didn't know we were getting anything tonight." "I thought you might." "Appreciate it," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "You always said I was expensive. Here's the receipt." With that, I leaned back in my chair, watching them both with an intensity I hadn't allowed myself to have in years. The silence that followed felt like it could last forever. My father was the first to speak, his tone sharp. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, his grip on his glass tightening. I didn't look away. "You always made me feel like everything I did came at a cost. The therapy sessions, the emotional toll of growing up in a house where I was invisible, those things aren't free. They cost me, and now they cost you." There was a long pause as the weight of my words settled over the table. My mother opened her box, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled out a stack of invoices, each one detailing a session I'd paid for over the years. She stared at them in disbelief. My father, still silent, scanned the invoices with a look of growing frustration. "I thought you were past this," my mother finally said, her voice shaky now. "This is childish, Natalie. You can't seriously expect us to pay these bills." I could feel my heart racing, but I stayed grounded. "I'm not expecting anything from you," I said, my voice unwavering. "I'm just showing you what it cost me to become the person I am today. And if that's too much for you to handle, then maybe it's time for us to face the truth about our relationship." The room around us seemed to quiet, the noise of the dinner fading as everyone in the vicinity became aware of the tension at our table. I didn't care. This moment was mine, and I wasn't going to shrink away from it. My father shifted uncomfortably. In his seat, his face flushed. "This is ridiculous. You're acting like we never did anything for you." "You did," I replied, my voice calm but resolute. "But it wasn't enough, and it never will be. You taught me how to survive, but you never taught me how to live. That's the part you missed." I could see the cracks in their facade now. They were angry, but there was something else beneath that anger. Regret, confusion, maybe even guilt. But they weren't ready to acknowledge it. Not yet. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a little more force than necessary. "I'm done with pretending. I'm done with carrying the weight of this family's failures on my shoulders. You wanted me to be something I wasn't, and now I'm something you can't control. Maybe that's the hardest thing for you to accept." I turned to leave the table, not looking back. The room seemed to swallow me up as I walked away, but there was a part of me that felt lighter, freer. I didn't know if they would ever understand what I had done or why I had done it, but I didn't need them to. This was the first time I had ever spoken my truth, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally free. I left the dinner before anyone had a chance to follow. The cool evening air hit me as I stepped outside, and for a moment, I just stood there, letting the breeze settle over me. I could still feel the tension in the air from the table, my parents' shock, their disappointment, their anger. But I didn't care. I'd said what I needed to say. And now, for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. I pulled out my phone and saw that I had several missed calls and messages. Most of them were from my mother. There was a string of frantic texts, a few voicemails filled with panic and confusion. My father had sent a single short message. "We need to talk." But I didn't want to talk. Not yet. Not with them. I wasn't ready to face the aftermath of what I'd just done. I'd been prepared to confront them for years, but I hadn't expected it to feel so raw. I wasn't just standing up for myself anymore. I was breaking years of silence, of inherited pain. I walked aimlessly down the street, letting the minutes tick by, the distance between me and the dinner growing with every step. Part of me wanted to call someone, to reach out to anyone who might understand what I was going through. But who would I call? I'd spent so much of my life trying to explain myself to my parents, but in the end, it was clear that they weren't the ones who needed to hear me. I was the one who needed to hear myself. Eventually, I found myself outside a small cafe. The dimly lit interior was welcoming, and I knew that if I walked in, I could sit quietly with a cup of tea and let the world sort itself out for a while. The thought of being alone, of having some time to reflect, seemed like the only thing that could calm me now. I pushed open the door and ordered my usual chamomile tea, light on the honey. I found a quiet table in the corner and settled in, my phone still buzzing with messages from my mother. She had started calling again. The messages more desperate, but there was nothing left to say. There was nothing left to prove. The warm cup of tea in my hands was grounding, and for a while, I let myself just be. The noise of the cafe, the clinking of cups and quiet conversations filled the space around me, but I felt alone in my thoughts. I couldn't help but replay the dinner over and over in my mind. Their faces, their shock, the sound of my father's voice as he tried to justify everything they had done to me. I thought about the years of therapy, the countless sessions where I had unpacked the weight of their neglect, the ways they had emotionally held me hostage without even realizing it. I'd spent so much time blaming myself, wondering if I could have been better, tried harder, loved them in a way that would have made them see me. But in that moment, at the dinner, it finally clicked. I didn't need to fix them. I needed to fix me. The tears that had been threatening to spill for days finally fell, but they were different now. They weren't tears of sadness or grief. They were tears of release, of letting go. I had spent years telling myself that I wasn't enough, that my feelings weren't valid, that I wasn't deserving of love unless I met certain conditions. But I was enough. I always had been. The quiet hum of the cafe was like a soft lullaby, the world outside fading as I allowed myself to finally rest in the truth of who I was without apology. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. Another message from my mother. I glanced at it but didn't open it. I wasn't ready to respond. I didn't know if I ever would be. For the first time in a long time, I felt no need to rush back into the chaos of my family's expectations. They would have to come to terms with what I had said, what I had done. I couldn't carry their guilt any longer, and I certainly couldn't carry their shame. That wasn't my burden to bear. I finished my tea slowly, allowing the warmth to soak into my bones. There would be more battles ahead, more challenges, and certainly more awkward conversations with my parents. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of them anymore. I wasn't afraid of the fallout. It was my turn to choose. And I was choosing peace. The next few days passed in a strange sort of limbo. My phone stayed silent for the most part, save for a few more messages from my mother. She'd stopped calling after the first few attempts. I knew she was waiting for me to make the first move, but I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure I ever would be. Then, the inevitable happened. It was a Saturday afternoon when I received the call. My father's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, I considered not answering. I could let it ring out like I had with my mother, but something inside me told me it was time. I swiped to answer, holding my breath for what was to come. Hello? Natalie? His voice was strained, the weight of the conversation looming over every syllable. We need to talk. I exhaled, almost relieved that he'd come to me, instead of the other way around. There was a moment of silence between us, a pause that stretched a little too long. In that silence, I could hear the years of tension, of unsaid words, all building up to this one moment. What is there to talk about? I asked, my voice firmer than I felt. I said what I needed to say. There was a soft sigh on the Other end, followed by his familiar, calculated tone. You've made your point, Natalie, but there's more to the story. I'm sure you know that. I felt my heart rate pick up. Was he really going to try and manipulate me again? Was this another one of his classic attempts to shift the blame back onto me? I wasn't going to fall for it. Not this time. I know my truth, I said, keeping my tone steady. And I don't need to hear the same excuses you've been giving me for years. It's not about what you want to say. It's about what I've had to carry. A long pause. You've been to therapy, Natalie, he said, almost as if he were stating a fact. That's fine. We're not denying that. But we're your parents. We've always tried our best. Your best wasn't good enough, I shot back, the words leaving my mouth with a sharpness I hadn't expected. Your best left me in therapy for years. Your best left me with the kind of scars that I still have to explain to other people. Your best wasn't enough, Dad, and I'm done pretending it was. There was silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought he had hung up, but then I heard him speak again, quieter this time. I never meant to hurt you, Natalie, he said, his voice faltering in a way that I'd never heard before. I'm sorry for that. The apology hit me like a weight to the chest. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd ever received from him in my life. And in that moment, I realized something. It wasn't about me needing their approval anymore. It wasn't about fixing what was broken between us. I'd already started to fix myself, and that was enough. Sorry doesn't change the years of damage, Dad, I replied, my voice softer now, but still firm. But it's a start, and it's enough for me to move forward. I don't expect you to be perfect, but I do expect you to understand that I don't owe you my silence anymore. He let out a heavy breath, and for the first time, I heard a crack in his voice. I don't know how to fix this, Natalie. I don't know how to make up for everything. You can't, I said, my heart pounding. But you can stop pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't, and you can start respecting me as an adult, with my own boundaries. There was a long pause, and I wondered if he would say anything more. But then, unexpectedly, he did. Okay, he said quietly. I'll try. I almost didn't know how to respond to that. I had spent so many years waiting for him to say something like that, to acknowledge the pain he had caused. And while his words didn't fix anything, they were a recognition of my existence beyond his expectations. It was something. I'm not going to ask you to change overnight, I said after a long moment, but I'm not going to stay silent for you anymore. I can't. I understand, he said, and this time, there was no denial in his voice, no attempt to explain it away. For the first time, I believed him. We stayed silent for a moment, neither of us knowing what to say next. Then, before I could gather my thoughts, he spoke again. I'll talk to your mother, he said softly. We'll figure out how to move forward, but I need you to know that I love you, Natalie, even if I don't always show it the right way. Those words, simple, yet full of weight, hung in the air between us. I love you too, I said, my voice more hesitant than I had expected. But I need more than just words, Dad. I need you to act like it. I will, he promised. And this time, I believed him. I ended the call shortly after, my fingers trembling as I hung up the phone. The conversation hadn't been perfect, but it had been real. It had been the start of something. Something I wasn't sure where it would go, but it was a start. I couldn't undo the years of hurt, but for the first time, I felt like I had the right to decide what came next. The days after my conversation with my father were a strange mix of clarity and confusion. I had expected some sort of relief, maybe even a sense of closure, but it didn't come. Instead, I was left with more questions than answers, more fragments of feelings that I wasn't quite sure what to do with. I kept replaying the conversation, in my head, analyzing every word, every tone, trying to make sense of it all. My father had apologized. For the first time in my life, he had admitted that he wasn't perfect and that he had caused me pain. That meant something, didn't it? But then I remembered the years before, the years of manipulation, The cold silences, the emotional distance that had always been there. Apologies didn't erase any of that. They didn't make it go away, no matter how much I wanted them to. I tried to tell myself that this was the start of something new, that things were going to change. But deep down, I wasn't sure how much I could really believe in that. People, like my father, didn't change easily, and I wasn't sure I had it in me to wait around for him to figure out how to be the parent I'd always needed. I found myself sitting at my kitchen table one night, the glow of my phone screen illuminating my face as I scrolled through social media. Everyone seemed so normal, so happy. I'd seen posts from friends at their family gatherings, smiling pictures of parents and children, laughing together, sharing meals. It seemed so simple, so effortless. I envied them. What would it be like to have a parent who just loved you without conditions, without games? To have a family that didn't make you second-guess every word, every move, every gesture? I didn't have that, and I never would. I scrolled past one more picture of someone's perfect family, a knot forming in my stomach. I threw my phone. Down on the table, frustration bubbling to the surface. I hadn't been able to ask for the one thing I wanted most, the love of parents who truly saw me, not as a project, not as an extension of their own needs, but as a person, separate and worthy in my own right. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone across the room, but instead I just sat there, staring at the screen, numb. That's when the message from my mother came through. The little notification buzzed, breaking the silence. "Are we going to talk about this?" I stared at the message, unsure of how to respond. There was no explanation, no context, just the question. But I knew exactly what she meant. It was the gift, the boxes, the therapy receipts. I hadn't heard from her in days. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but her silence had been almost worse than her words. Now, here it was, the inevitable follow-up. The words danced on the screen in front of me. "Are we going to talk about this?" I could feel the tension building in my chest. I wasn't ready for another conversation with her. I wasn't ready to explain myself again. And yet, I knew I had to. It was only a matter of time before this was going to blow up into something bigger. I didn't answer straight away. I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes, trying to breathe. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep doing this. These constant emotional tug-of-wars, the unresolved issues that hung over me like a cloud I couldn't shake off. What did she want from me? An apology? Was she waiting for me to back down and pretend that everything had been fine? Was she going to try and guilt me into feeling bad for standing up for myself? I didn't know. I didn't want to know, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. I picked up my phone, fingers trembling as I typed out my reply. "No, I'm not going to pretend like I owe you an explanation for why I gave you those boxes. I'm not going to apologize for standing up for myself. If you want to talk, we can, but not on your terms." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. There. It was out. Almost immediately, the bubbles appeared, indicating that she was typing. I stared at the screen, waiting for her response, but it didn't come right away. Instead, there was an eerie stillness. I set the phone down on the table, watching it, half expecting it to light up with a message any second. But time passed, and nothing happened. My mind raced. Was she crying? Was she angry? Or was she just too hurt to respond? I didn't know. What I did know was that I wasn't going to wait around for her approval anymore. I wasn't going to keep pretending that I didn't have the right to draw boundaries, that I didn't have the right to tell her how I felt, and that, in itself, was terrifying. Because as much as I wanted to be free of this, to be free of them and all their emotional baggage, I wasn't sure I knew how to be free of the guilt that came with it. I didn't know how to stop caring about what they thought of me. I didn't know how to stop being the daughter they had shaped me into, but I was going to have to figure it out. And it was going to hurt. A lot. But at least, for the first time, I was finally standing up for myself. The silence after my message to my mother was deafening. I stared at my phone screen, hoping for a response, but the little gray bubbles never appeared. It was as if time itself had stopped. I wasn't sure whether I felt relieved or anxious, But either way, my heart was pounding in my chest. Then, after what felt like an eternity, my phone buzzed. I snatched it up, my fingers trembling as I unlocked the screen. The message was from my mother, and for the first time in a long while, I couldn't predict what it would say. My stomach twisted as I read, "I don't understand why you're doing this. I did the best I could, Natalie. Do you think this is easy for me?" I blinked, the words sinking in slowly. There it was, the familiar guilt trip, the same manipulation, disguised as a plea for understanding. The same old story that had kept me stuck for years. The thing that had always made me question my reality, my feelings. But this time, I wasn't going to fall for it. Not anymore. I took a deep breath and typed back, "I'm not doing this to hurt you, Mum. I'm doing this to stop hurting myself. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine when it's not." I paused before hitting send. Part of me wanted to add more, wanted to list every instance of emotional neglect, every moment of coldness and indifference. But I didn't. Need to prove anything to her. Instead, I pressed send. The message flew off into the ether and I set the phone down. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm, to resist the urge to check for another reply immediately. And then the phone buzzed again. I swallowed hard and glanced at the screen. "Don't be so dramatic, Natalie. You're acting like I'm the villain here. I've done nothing but love you." The words hit harder than I expected. They were so familiar, so typical. And yet, I could feel my walls crumbling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to argue, to defend myself. But I had learned over the years that nothing ever came from arguing with her. Nothing ever changed. Instead, I breathed deeply and tried to steady myself. "Love doesn't hurt, Mum. I need you to understand that." There was no immediate response this time, and for a moment I felt a strange sense of peace. I had said what I needed to say. I had drawn my line in the sand. No more silence. No more walking on eggshells. No more pretending I didn't feel the way I felt. The next few minutes passed like a slow-motion scene in a movie. My mind was racing, but the silence felt almost like a victory. It wasn't until my phone buzzed again that I realized I had been holding my breath. This time, it was a long message. My heart sank as I read it. "Your father and I have done everything we could for you. Everything. You've always had what you wanted, and now you're turning your back on us, on your family, just because of some petty grievances you're holding on to. I don't understand how you can be so ungrateful. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us?" I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks as I read the words. They stung, yes, but they also felt so predictable. The accusations, the blame, the distorted version of reality she'd always tried to sell me. The thing was, I knew better now. I'd spent too many years unraveling the truth of who they were, and I wasn't going to let their lies shape me anymore. I typed back quickly, "I'm not turning my back on you. I'm turning my back on the idea of what you think a daughter should be. I'm not going to keep pretending everything's fine when it isn't." I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, my thumb hovering over the send button. There were so many things I wanted to say, so many things I wanted to scream at her, but then I thought of all the times she had shut me down, all the times I had tried to speak up and been made to feel small. This time, it was different. This time, I wasn't going to let her take away my voice. I pressed send. I felt the weight of my words settle over me like a heavy blanket, but there was also a strange sense of relief. I was done with the games, done with the manipulation, done with being the person they wanted me to be. The phone buzzed again almost immediately. "Fine, have it your way, but don't come crying to us when you realize you've pushed everyone away." I stared at the screen, feeling a coldness settle in my chest. The familiar guilt that always followed these exchanges tried to creep up again, but I fought it down. I wasn't the one pushing anyone away. I had never been the one doing that. This was her. This was all on her. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the conversation. It wasn't the end of anything. It was just the beginning. The beginning of something that might be harder than I could ever imagine, but also the beginning of my freedom. And for the first time, that scared me less than it excited me. The days following my conversation with my mother felt like walking through fog. The phone was quieter than usual, and I couldn't help but notice how unsettling the silence was. It was the calm after the storm, but I knew a new storm was brewing. I went through the motions, working, meeting up with friends, pretending things were normal. But deep down, I was waiting for the fallout, for the inevitable accusations, for the blame. It came the next morning. I had just finished my morning coffee when the phone buzzed. A message from my father. I already knew what it would say, but seeing his name on the screen still made my stomach drop. I hope you're happy now. You've destroyed everything. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement. A statement designed to make me feel guilty. A statement designed to make me question whether I had done the right thing. I stared at the message for a long time, the weight of it pressing on my chest. My father had always been the quieter one, the one who didn't raise his voice. But his words carried an undeniable weight, and right now, they were heavy. But this time, I wasn't going to fall for it. This time, I wasn't going to let their words manipulate me. I typed back, I didn't destroy anything. I'm finally standing up for myself, something I should have done years ago. I hit send before I could second guess myself. For a moment, the phone sat in my hand, vibrating softly as the message sent. I wasn't sure if I was expecting an immediate reply, but when one didn't come, I felt a strange mixture of relief and frustration. Part of me wanted them to argue. Part of me wanted them to try to convince me that I was wrong. But another part of me, an unfamiliar part, wanted to let it all go. I wanted to be done. And yet, I wasn't done. I had no choice but to wait. The reply came later that day, this time from my mother. You'll regret this. You'll come crawling back. I know you will. I read the message and felt a flicker of anger burn inside. Me. How could she say something like that? How could she think I'd ever want to go back to the person I was before? The person who silently endured everything and kept hoping things would change. But I had changed. And she couldn't see it. I typed back, my fingers moving with a new kind of certainty. No, I won't regret it. I'm done pretending. This time, I didn't wait for a response. I set my phone down and took a deep breath. I had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally in control. I wasn't the child they had wanted me to be. I wasn't the daughter they had expected me to be. I was Natalie, and I was free. The silence that followed the exchange with my parents was deafening. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just between us, but inside me. They had always had this power over me, this ability to make me feel small, insignificant. But now, for the first time, I felt untethered. Free, yes, but also uncertain. I had expected them to fight back. I had expected them to try to convince me that I was making a huge mistake. Instead, there was nothing. No phone calls, no angry messages, no attempts to make me feel guilty. At first, I thought maybe it was just a matter of time, that they needed space to cool off. But as the days stretched into a few weeks, I started to wonder if this silence was their way of punishing me. I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew what I didn't want. I didn't want to go back to how things were. I didn't want to be their daughter in the way they expected me to be. I didn't want to feel that weight pressing down on me every time we spoke, every time we saw each other. But it was hard to ignore the nagging feeling that, despite everything, I missed them. Or at least, I missed the idea of what they could have been. The parents I had always hoped they'd be, the ones who might have celebrated my independence, might have supported me when I needed them most. It wasn't that I wanted to forgive them, not yet anyway, but there was this quiet ache inside me, a longing for something that felt unattainable. Maybe I was just fooling myself. Maybe what I wanted didn't even exist. It was on a Thursday afternoon when I got the message. It was simple. A single line. I miss you. It came from my mother. No explanation, no apology, just those 3 words. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. For a moment, I was paralyzed, unsure of what to do. My mind raced. What did this mean? Was this the start of something, or just another attempt to draw me back in? I wanted to feel anger. I wanted to type back something sharp, something cutting, but instead, all I could feel was a strange mixture of sadness and resignation. This wasn't the first time she had said something like this, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. It was her way of testing the waters, seeing if I would bend. I had to make a decision. I had to decide whether I would stand firm or crumble under the weight of my own emotions. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a second, and then, in a moment of clarity, I tapped out a reply. I'm still here, but I'm not coming back. It was honest, it was final, and in that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I hit send, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. The days after I sent that message were a blur. I went through the motions of life, work, errands, dinner with friends, but my mind kept circling back to my parents, to the silence that hung between us. That message from my mother hadn't been followed up with anything more, and though I had expected some sort of response, part of me had hoped she would just leave me alone. But the silence wasn't as comforting as I'd imagined. It was unsettling, like a thick fog that clouded everything, making it hard to see clearly. I had finally done what I thought I needed to do, but the aftermath was more complicated than I had anticipated. I kept thinking about all the years I had spent tiptoeing around them, trying to keep the peace. All the therapy sessions, the journal, entries, the moments of self-doubt that followed their every word. I had convinced myself that if I could just get their approval, things would be different, that somehow their love and validation would fill the empty spaces inside me. But it wasn't true. I had been chasing an illusion, hoping they would be the parents I needed them to be, not the ones they had always been. It was strange, but now that I had finally broken free from their grip, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. For so long, I had carried the burden of their expectations, their emotional neglect, the guilt they imposed on me. And now, there was no one else to blame but myself. It felt like a deep, aching emptiness, like I had ripped out a part of my life that I didn't know how to replace. And yet, in that emptiness, there was also a strange kind of clarity. I could hear my own voice more clearly than I had in years. I could feel my own pulse, my own rhythm, without the constant distraction of their demands. It was liberating, but it was also lonely. I had been living for so long in reaction to them, doing what I thought I needed to do to make them happy, to keep them from turning their back on me, that I had lost sight of who I was outside of, their expectations. I had spent my entire adult life trying to heal from their mistakes, trying to fill the gaps they had left behind. But now, the healing had to be my own responsibility. It wasn't enough to just break free from them. I had to rebuild myself piece by piece, without leaning on the idea that their approval was something I could ever rely on. One night, after a long shift at work, I sat on my couch, staring at the wall in front of me. I felt the familiar weight of exhaustion settle over me, both physical and emotional. It was the kind of tired that went beyond the body, that sank into your bones. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. It was my own weight now, and for once, that felt like something I could manage. I was at work when it happened. The familiar sound of my phone vibrating on the desk broke my concentration. Glancing at the screen, I saw it was a number I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it might be a wrong number or a telemarketer, but then the instinct kicked in, a gut feeling that told me this was more important than I was willing to admit. I hesitated, staring at the screen. It could be my parents, trying to reach out again, trying to re-enter my life after the silence of the past few days. It could also be someone I didn't want to talk to. But the phone was already ringing, and I pressed the button to pick it up. "Hello?" I said, trying to mask the shakiness in my voice. "Natalie?" The voice on the other end was familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. It was warm, but there was an undertone of something else, a sense of caution, of someone testing the waters. "Who's this?" I asked, my mind racing to identify the speaker. "It's your father." His voice sounded slightly strained, as though he wasn't used to making calls like this. I froze. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. My father hadn't spoken to me directly in what felt like years, at least not without some form of manipulation or expectation. I hadn't thought I'd hear from him at all after everything that had happened, after the message, after the gifts, after the truth finally came out. "Dad," I managed to say, my voice quieter than I intended. "Yes," he replied, his tone careful, almost uncertain. I just wanted to talk." I wasn't sure how to respond. I had no script for this moment, no rehearsed line. All I had was a silence that had stretched for so long between us, and suddenly, his voice felt like it was shattering that silence. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I know things have been difficult," he began, and I could almost picture him rubbing the back of his neck, something he always did when he was uncomfortable. "I've been thinking a lot, and I wanted to say, I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, the apology I'd waited for all these years, and yet it didn't feel like the relief I had expected. There was something hollow in it, something missing. His voice had a weight to it, a sense of desperation that I hadn't anticipated. But still, the apology was there, the one thing I never thought I would hear. I took a deep breath. "I've heard those words before, Dad, and they've never meant anything." He paused on the other end, and for a moment, I thought he might hang up. I thought he might go back to pretending nothing had happened. But then, in the softest of tones, he spoke again. "I know. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't know how to fix things, but I'm trying." The vulnerability in his voice was almost too much to handle. Part of me wanted to reach through the phone and scream at him, to remind him of everything he'd done, to remind him of the years he'd robbed me of. But another part of me, the part that had spent years searching for the tiniest bit of love from him, felt a pang of something else. Hope, maybe? A foolish hope that something could change, even now. "I don't know if you can fix anything," I said softly, "but I appreciate you trying." It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't reconciliation, but it was a start. Maybe the first step towards something different. I wasn't ready to trust him again, but I was willing to hear him out. For the first time, in the midst of all this chaos, I allowed myself the possibility that healing wasn't all or nothing. Maybe there were small steps to take, and I didn't have to take them all at once. "I'll be here," he said, his voice sounding more fragile than I had ever heard it. "I'll think about it," I replied, and with that, the conversation ended. As I put my phone down, I couldn't help but feel that strange, familiar mix of confusion and exhaustion. Was this the beginning of something, or just another false hope? But I had made it this far. Maybe that was enough for today. The days following the phone call were a blur. I told myself I wouldn't fall into the trap of waiting for something that might never come. I wouldn't let myself be swept up by the old patterns. The patterns of false hope, of endless cycles of apology and disappointment. But the truth was, I didn't know how to stop thinking about it. Every time my phone buzzed, I found myself staring at it, half expecting his name to pop up on the screen. I would quickly dismiss the thought, reminding myself that I couldn't afford to fall back into those old patterns. But it didn't help. The phone didn't ring again. For days, it stayed silent. A silence that was somehow louder than any conversation we'd ever had. A silence that screamed louder than all the words we'd exchanged over the years. I spent my days working, trying to stay busy, trying to shut out the nagging doubts in my head. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was teetering on the edge of something. Something uncertain. Something dangerous. That afternoon, I was sitting at my desk when my boss walked in, his voice cutting through my thoughts. "Natalie, can I talk to you for a second?" I looked up, trying to clear my head. "Sure," I said, pushing my chair back and standing up. We moved into the conference room. It was a small, quiet space, the kind of room you'd expect to have serious conversations in. I had no idea what was coming, but a part of me, deep down, already knew. "I've been meaning to talk to you about your performance recently," my boss began, his tone measured and professional. "You've been doing a great job, but I've noticed that something's been affecting your work. You've been distracted." I swallowed. I hadn't realized it had shown. I'd tried so hard to keep everything together, to push through the fog that had been clouding my mind, but apparently it was noticeable. "I'm fine," I said, my voice coming out a bit too defensively. "Just a lot on my plate, that's all." He raised an eyebrow, not convinced. "Is this something we can talk about?" I looked down at my hands, the tension rising in my chest. The truth was, there was so much I couldn't say. There was so much I couldn't explain. How could I tell him that a simple phone call from my father had set off a chain reaction in my life? How could I put into words the years of emotional neglect, of being gaslighted and manipulated, and the mess of trying to rebuild myself from the rubble? "I'll be okay," I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. He gave me a long look before nodding. "If you ever need to talk, my door's always open." "Thanks," I muttered, grateful for the gesture, but feeling the weight of it too heavily to accept it fully. As I returned to my desk, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing control. That old pattern was rearing its head again. Shutting everyone out, pretending everything was fine. It was how I'd survived for so long, how I'd made it through the worst of it. But now, it was starting to feel like a cage. I stared at my screen, the cursor blinking at me like a reminder that time was moving, whether I was ready for it or not. My father's call had been an invitation to move forward, to break free from the past, but I wasn't sure how to take it. I wasn't sure if I could take it. And the silence, it was getting louder, more oppressive. I could hear it even when no one else was around, and it was starting to suffocate me. I needed to break the cycle. I needed to stop falling into the same traps. But how could I break free when everything around me was so damn familiar? It happened one night, a quiet evening that didn't feel like any other. I sat alone in my apartment, the glow from the streetlights outside casting soft shadows across the room. The silence was different now, less oppressive, more hopeful. I had spent so many months living with that same unbearable quiet, the kind that came with trying to forget, trying to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. But tonight, I felt something shift. The phone rang. I looked at it for a moment before answering, my heart racing as the name appeared on the screen. It was my father, the call I'd been waiting for, the one I wasn't sure would ever come. For a moment, I hesitated. Was I ready for this? I swallowed my fear and answered. "Hello?" "Natalie," his voice came through, strained but clear. I've been thinking about our conversation." I waited. He didn't continue at first, as if he was carefully choosing his words. When he did speak again, there was something different about his tone, something more tentative, less authoritative. I know I haven't been the father I should have been to you. I've been thinking a lot about the things I said, and I realize now how much I hurt you." The words hung there, heavy with the weight of years of absence, of the damage done. I felt a strange mix of relief and frustration. This wasn't what I'd imagined. This wasn't the apology I'd spent so long waiting for, the one I'd hoped would come after all these years. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was just a recognition of the truth. I've done things I'm not proud of, Natalie. Things I should have done differently. And I don't know how to fix it all, but I want to try. I closed my eyes, the sting of old wounds flaring up. The words I had wanted to hear, the validation I had longed for, were finally here. But in that moment, they felt almost too late. Could you ever truly fix something like this? Could you undo the years of hurt, of silence, of distance? "I don't know if it can be fixed, Dad," I said, my voice steady but soft. "But I'm trying to fix me, and I'm not sure if I can be the person you want me to be or the person you expect me to be. But I need to be the person I need to be for myself." There was a pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end, the air thick with unsaid things. But this time, it didn't feel like I was waiting for permission. I was finally, truly free. Free to define myself, to step out of the shadow of their expectations, to stop living in the aftermath of their mistakes. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you, Natalie." Those words, those simple, unexpected words, hit me harder than I'd ever imagined. The weight of years of disappointment, of wondering if I would ever be enough, suddenly started to lift. "I'm going to be okay, Dad," I said, a small smile breaking through the tension. "I'm already better than I was yesterday." The conversation ended, but it wasn't a closing. It was a beginning of something new, something I hadn't thought possible. I didn't know what the future would hold, and I couldn't promise that everything would be perfect from here on out. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control. I had a sense of peace that wasn't dependent on their approval. For once, the silence wasn't something that weighed me down. It was something I owned, something I could shape, and fill however I chose. I set the phone down and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. There were no more debts to be paid, no more apologies to be extracted. Just me, standing at the edge of the life I had been building, and it was enough.